Hi, this is Bethany Johnson presenting to PLNU's first cohort for the MIOL program. Over the time I've been in this program, I've learned a lot about myself and my passions have become more tangible. Last year, I served as the COO for a small girl power nonprofit here in San Diego, and during my time there, I realized something about the fight for gender equality. I don't think we're going to get where we want to go without joining with men and solving the problem together. I don't think the problems we have surrounding gender are just on our side of the fence. So during this course, I set out to investigate more. So today we're going to be talking about male gender bias. We're going to be talking about how it shows up in our organizations and what, as leaders, we can actually do about it. In order to set this up for you, let me tell you a little story. Think about it like a case study. June was the biggest sales month of Shelby's entire career. It was the culmination of the largest project she had ever landed, which had taken her almost an entire year to complete. The day Shelby's company, Total Workplace, billed the majority of the job, she was by far the highest in sales of the day. On her morning sales report, she was finally in the green, a color code used by the company's VP of sales that allowed everyone to know instantly if the rep was meeting her numbers. If the daily total was red, she was below her budget. If that number was green, she was on pace to meet or beat her goal. As soon as the report released, several text messages and emails trickled in from coworkers congratulating her on her big day. Her feelings of pride and excitement screeched to a halt for just a second, as Shelby realized that she hadn't heard from her boss or the president yet. Both men received the numbers before 6 a.m., and historically, she would get a text even before she woke up for the day if her numbers were good. Today, it was radio silence. She knew she wouldn't be getting that call today. When her phone rang at 9:30 that morning, she didn't even want to pick it up. It was finally a call from Jake, her boss, but she let it go to voicemail. It was safer to know what she was dealing with, so she could armor up before talking to him. 2 seconds later, the text came in. Johnson, call me when you get this. There it was, the message she feared. It was not the message of excitement or congratulations that she hoped for. Something was wrong. Sadly, when she returned his call, the first words out of Jake's mouth were, I thought it was going to be bigger. Things at Total Workplace had changed a lot over the last couple of years. 9 years ago, when Shelby was courted and invited to join the company, the new owner sat across from her at a shiny new desk and won her over when he said, You know, I don't sleep much anymore, but I've never been so happy to be awake. Previously, she had worked for Edward at a much larger competitor, and when he was named president of Total Workplace, he invited her and her clients to join him. After all of the frustration of working for a sales organization that was in financial danger and going through constant reorganization, his words were a breath of fresh air. Finally, there was something to get excited about. Now, all of that excitement was all but gone for Shelby and most of the rest of the team. The company that once had an entrepreneurial spirit born from creativity and quick thinking was filled to the brim with fear, blame, and shame. Shelby harbored no delusions that Total Workplace was ever a perfect place to work for. But the teamwork and camaraderie that developed when she rolled up her sleeves and dug in with her coworkers day after day was almost non-existent. There was practically no purpose of the touchdown desks Total Workplace installed in their new working showroom. Other than the support staff, the salespeople rarely showed up anymore, opting for the safety of working from home or in the field every day. Shelby realized it all started 2 years ago when Jake, the new sales manager, called a conference call to talk about low sales numbers. He asked the group if there was anything stopping them from growing. Shelby was accustomed to an open environment at Total Workplace, so she explained several problems with customer service that were taking up way too much of her time lately. Much to her shock, Jake slammed her publicly for making excuses. Not surprisingly, no one else spoke up. 2 weeks later, at the company-wide quarterly meeting, all of a sudden no one talked anymore or spoke up when they were asked for input. Thankfully, this company is still growing, but let's face it, stagnation is on the horizon. Their North office can't seem to keep support staff, and teamwork, morale, and commitment are drowning. This shaming behavior leads to a lack of trust, which, of course, according to Patrick Lencioni, author of Five Dysfunctions, it's the first and more difficult problem with dysfunctional teams. Shame is a petri dish for fear. It crushes our tolerance for vulnerability, thereby killing engagement, innovation, creativity, productivity, and trust. Before you can do anything about shame culture in your organization, the first problem is you have to be able to recognize it. And shame within an organization is a whole lot like termites in a house. When you walk around the house, you have no idea that they're there. You're glancing around, you don't see them. But once you dig deep, it becomes obvious as part of the foundation. So here are some surefire signs that shame is permeating your culture. Blaming, gossiping, favoritism, name-calling, and harassment are all behavior cues that shame has permeated a culture. But a more obvious sign is when shame becomes an outright management tool. Just as we saw with the case of Total Workplace, shame has started to permeate the culture in such a way that it's actually a tool that management is using to keep people in line. And if the bulldozer of shame is not recognized, confronted, and eradicated, a company cannot thrive. Switching gears a little, I want to draw the line that connects the shaming culture that is stalling out organizations to the shame that is the backbone of the box that our culture shoves men into. I think when we all hear the term gender bias, most of the time we're thinking about women not making as much money as men or about women not being fairly represented in leadership positions. But men face it too. So today we're going to flip this idea on its head and we're going to talk about male gender bias. Now, I'm actually not alone in this. There is an author and journalist for the Medical Daily. Her name is Samantha Olson, and she has this to say about it. Feminism only speaks of one lopsided perspective in the gender inequality story. There is a common misconception that men are gender exempt from burdening expectations, stereotypes, and societal pressures. For the most part, we believe that they're free from glass ceilings and slut shaming, but in truth, boys actually might be faced with a force entirely different, more complicated, and more painful than we can really imagine. Being told to fit into a hypermasculine and misogynistic mold. What I hope to do today is not discredit what women face. This is not an either-or situation. It's an and situation. And if we can add this other side of the coin to the story, we actually might be able to move this thing along at a much faster pace. Now, to begin this topic, we need to set a framework to work from in regards to sex and gender. While sex is the biological dimension of being male or female, or, in other words, what parts do you have? Gender refers to the social dimension of being male or female. Gender roles are the set of expectations that prescribe how females or males should think, act, and feel. Now, some scientists, like Sigmund Freud, believe that your anatomy, your parts, predict your behavior, while many others prescribe to the idea that gender is a social construction that's learned over time in the same way we would learn about the norms of our culture, or even how to speak English. Take the colors pink and blue, for example. Often without realizing it, parents enforce culturally appropriate gender behavior before a child is even born, by choosing a pink blanket for a girl or a blue blanket for a boy. You might also be thinking right now, hey, wait a minute. Aren't our brains different too? Yes, you're right, they are. But almost all of these differences can be explained by changes that occur from what we learn in our environment. In most Western cultures, the pressure to be masculine is far greater for males than the pressure is to be feminine for a girl. The term tomboy, for example, is not generally viewed as an insult, but there are 0 terms for a boy who acts in a feminine way that aren't insulting. Brene Brown, who is a self-proclaimed shame and vulnerability researcher from Texas, has discovered that messages of shame are organized around gender. She defines shame as an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love, acceptance, and belonging. For women, there are whole constellations of often contradictory expectations that, if not met, are sources of shame. But for men, the overarching message is that any weakness is shameful. And since vulnerability is often perceived as weakness, it is especially risky for men to practice vulnerability. In Brene's book, Daring Greatly, she tells a story about a man who wanted to be an artist as a little boy. Now, art made him supremely happy, and both his parents were at least quietly supportive and at least tolerant of his passion. Until one day, the boy's dad and the boy's uncle were in the kitchen, and on the refrigerator there was a picture that the boy drew. And the uncle spoke up and told the boy's father that he must be raising a gay man. But, of course, he used horrible words for it. The boy never drew another thing. This is the sort of shame that men are running around with. But the even more difficult part of the whole thing is that they aren't even allowed to talk about it. If they raise the white flag, that makes them weak as well. So they're, in fact, trapped. Now that we have a framework to begin, men face sexism and gender stereotyping too, and a lot of that is balled up in shame about what it means to be masculine. We can move on to talk about what we can do about this as leaders. How can we steamroll the shame out of our organizations? Today, I want you to leave here with a 5-stage arsenal for you to work from to make these changes. The first is emotional intelligence, evaluating and developing emotional intelligence in your top leadership. Second is establishing a sense of urgency. This is of the utmost importance if you're going to make real change happen. Third is normalizing limitations. In your top leadership, you have to convey to the rest of your team that making mistakes is an everyday occurrence. Then you have engaged feedback. Feedback is really important to employees. They need to know what they're doing right, and they need to know how to grow. And finally, building trust. If this is the backbone of the whole thing, if you don't have it, none of this will work. First, let's chat a minute about why emotional intelligence is so important for this kind of initiative. See, leaders often don't recognize how they reinforce through their own behaviors and actions the very pathologies they're fighting to eradicate. Everyone has heard the old saying, if it's everyone else, well then maybe the problem is you. See, research has actually proven that this idea is true. The neurotic personality styles of top executives spread down the lines of command throughout their organizations, and under those circumstances, an individual pathology turns into an organizational one. Therefore, the nature of the trap that these male leaders are in actually disseminates through the organization, and more than likely, the behaviors they engage in feel normal to them. They're probably completely unaware of how they are encouraging these caustic behaviors within their organization. Now, there are 2 parts of emotional intelligence to focus on for this particular situation: self-awareness and self-management, which are part of the personal domain. Simply put, self-awareness means having a deep understanding of your own emotions, as well as your own strengths, limitations, values, and motives. One of the most telling signs that a leader is self-aware is his inclination toward reflection and consideration. Additionally, self-management is a leader's ability to transcend his own emotions and not live as a prisoner to his feelings. These kinds of leaders realize how their own emotions affect those around them, and by staying in control of their feelings and impulses, they craft environments of trust, comfort, and fairness. Once a leader sees the part that he plays in the problems in his organization and develops a higher level of emotional intelligence, he can get the ball rolling toward lasting change. now that we're moving on to establishing urgency, I want to get down to why this is also really important. It's one of the biggest mistakes that leaders make when they're trying to establish a big change in their company is they don't push and establish a high enough sense of urgency in their managers and their employees. And most of the time that problem stems from the leader's erroneous notion that they can force a huge change, and they underestimate how hard it is to drive employees out of their own comfort zones. Additionally, some leaders make the mistake that increasing urgency is the same thing as ratcheting up anxiety. And actually, when anxiety levels increase, people are forced further into hiding and are even more resistant to the change. In the situation of Total Workplace, for example, the problems they're facing aren't glaring. The company's profits are increasing, they are completing a merger of their largest acquisition ever, and Jake was just promoted to the vice president of sales. If you listen to those facts, it makes sense that no one smells a problem. Shame works just like termites in a house, like we talked about before. It's hidden in the dark behind walls and constantly eating away at our infrastructure until one day the stairs just suddenly crumble. In order to get anyone to jump on board with a large systematic change that will take to reverse these problems, first they will have to believe the problem exists and that the problem is life-threatening to the organization. The one way to do that is to break down complacency. Total Workplace will need to bring the crisis of stagnation, lack of creativity, and fear of conflict to everyone's attention and demonstrate what effect that these problems can have on the company's future. So, talking about normalizing limitations and engaging feedback. See, shame can only rise so far in any system before people start to disengage and protect themselves. And when they disengage, they aren't showing up, they aren't contributing, and they aren't caring. In order to combat this shame spiral, we have to bring shame and its realities to the forefront in our companies through open discussion, training, increased vulnerability, and transparency, and also by seeking to uncover where shame is at work in our organizations. To take this a step further, we also need to normalize limitations and create a culture of honest, constructive, and engaged feedback. You see, feedback grows best in organizations where discomfort is normal. Growth and learning aren't comfortable, and therefore in an environment where the leadership and its employees not only embrace discomfort but lean into it, will have the most success in our fast-paced business culture. Feedback isn't the opportunity to lay the next assault, but it's an opportunity to sit on the same side of the table with your employees and normalize struggle. Take Jake from Total Workplace, for example. If he were to engage in normalizing struggle, he might tell a story of a similar problem he had when he was a rep as he highlights an area of improvement with one of his employees. In this way, Jake is showing his sales staff that he is on their side, they can trust him, and they are not alone. Shame cannot live in that kind of environment. Brené Brown, the researcher that we referenced before, actually recommends coming at feedback from a place of strength and limitations. See, most of us can go through the majority of our faults and our limitations and find strength lurking within. When we flip this idea around, we can take an inventory of our employees' strengths and suggest ways to address the related challenges. This way, feedback can be achieved in a constructive, open manner. For example, if someone can be controlling and micromanaging, he is also probably very responsible and produces quality work. Jake, for example, his dedication to success is also married to a limitation related to intolerance for mistakes. By making constructive feedback a priority and tearing down the walls of shame through vulnerability and normalizing struggle, Total Workplace can begin creating a culture that thrives on dynamic creativity. Finally, we come to trust. Trust is the backbone of all of these tactics. It is the base layer of the framework in which all of the other interdependent strategies are built. If trust is the foundation, it also means it's the most difficult and most critical section of the entire system. trust in this context is not the ability to predict someone's behavior, but the capability of an employee to be open to the others in their group about shortcomings, mistakes, appeals for help, and to also be able to be confident that those vulnerabilities will not be used against them. Unfortunately, vulnerability-based trust cannot be achieved overnight. It requires shared experiences over time. It requires multiple instances of follow-through, credibility, and an in-depth understanding of the unique attributes of team members. You probably are aware of lots of trust-building tools out there, but the two that might be the most effective for Total Workplace are personality and behavior preference profiles and the team effectiveness exercise. Both of these actually come from the framework of Peter Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions. The first exercise requires the team to choose a personality assessment. They really like the MBTI, but you can really use any of them. And then have each individual within the group take the test. Then, as a group, the members are able to share and learn from each person's personality type or temperament. And then when you review the outcomes of the assessments together, the team is able to break down the barriers of trust and be able to begin to understand and empathize with one another. A lot of the time, this activity ends in laughter, joking, people having those aha moments where they're resonating with the information that's revealed about their coworkers. This activity can soften and begin to bond the group. The second exercise I would recommend would be the team effectiveness exercise. Now, at first, this is going to seem really risky, but it's actually surprising how well even the most dysfunctional teams do. It requires team members to individually identify the single most important contribution that each of their peers makes to the team, as well as one area that they must either improve upon or eliminate for the good of the entire team. Now, every member of the team reports his or her responses in the group, focusing on one person at a time. And generally, the leader goes first in this situation. It helps them to demonstrate vulnerability, and it helps build a safe place for the exercise for the rest of the group. This exercise would be a paramount moment for the team at Total Office, helping them break down the fear of failure, blame, shame, and conflict. In conclusion, there are so many questions left to be asked and a great deal of work to do in order to answer them. There are countless books, we've all read them, from self-help books to relationship advice. There's even scientific research on the male mind to show you how women's brains are like spaghetti and men's brains are like waffles. There's others that will teach you all about the popular term emasculation or man-shaming, which may be just another way to push society into perpetuating male roles that we ourselves created. Scientific studies are actually showing us now that the difference between the male brain and the female brain are likely caused by the environment instead of true hardwiring, as we discussed before. Therefore, if we're going to go read all of these books on how to understand the male brain better and then conform to the norms that will continue to keep them in their societally accepted box, we're only going to further indoctrinate and perpetuate this larger problem. What we need to do is concentrate on what the box looks like, how the box manifests, how society enforces it, and what can we actually do about it. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you learned something new from this, and I hope as you walk away, you think about these problems in a different way, in a new way, in a larger way. Have an awesome day.